Hello, Jeffco. This is Shauna Fritzler with Jeffco PTA, and we are here today joined by our Legislative Chair, John Levine, and also Senator Rachel Zenzinger, who has been a tremendous advocate for public education in the Senate, and of course on the Joint Budget Committee, often called the JBC. So, ladies, I will let you take it away, and I'll get your screen shared here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us this morning. And we have needless to say, we have a pretty serious election coming up in November. Next slide, Shauna. Oh, I'm sorry. I think we went one too far.
Oh, sorry about that. No.
No, you're right. I'm sorry. Okay. So just as I mentioned, it's a long ballot this year. It's unbelievably long ballot. There's 11 statewide ballot measures. 5 of those PTA has taken a position on, and we have a long history of doing that. And we're going to focus specifically on those 5 measures today. If you have other questions about some of the other measures, let me know, and we'll try and cover that as best as we can. So our children's futures are on the receiving end of our decisions. We owe it to them to educate ourselves on these so that we are able to make wise decisions. And that's one of the reasons that I'm so pleased to have Senator Rachel Zenzinger join us this morning. Her position, she's a longtime educator and education advocate, and that background is huge as far as her position on the Joint Budget Committee. And with that, Senator Zenzinger, please take it away.
Oh, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm State Senator Rachel Zenzinger. I represent Senate District 19, which is Arvada and Westminster, all in Jefferson County. I do have an education background. I'm a licensed secondary social studies teacher, and I'm a 5th generation teacher. So my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandfather, all teachers, and I have two students that are attending the Jeffco Public Schools, both of which are considering a career in education. I was elected in 2016, which means that I'm up for re-election this year. For the first 3 years, because I did serve for one session back in 2014, but then as well as 2017 and 18, I actually served on the Senate Education Committee, which is a great place for me to be, given my background in education. I also, for the remainder 2 years of this term, served on the Joint Budget Committee. I was also the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and for 3 years, I served on the School Finance Committee. So I have a little bit of a perspective about how some of these ballot initiatives will actually impact our budget, particularly how they will impact school finance. And then last year, or over my 4-year term, I passed 27 education bills, many of which were related to school funding. So I'm very excited to be able to present to you today some of my perspective on these ballot measures. I just want to point out, however, that I am by no means an expert on these ballot initiatives. One resource that I definitely would recommend to you, and I will actually be using this as part of my notes today, is your 2020 Blue Book. This has some fantastic information about these different measures, and I would highly recommend that you give yourself plenty of time to go through your Blue Book. And as you can see, I even made little notes in the margins. I've got my little tabbies there. So I will be using this as part of my notes today. We have a couple of ballot initiatives that you can see up here on the screen, some of which are highlighted because those are the ones in which the PTA has taken a position on. We also have a couple of others, for example, Proposition 113, it was pretty controversial. It was a bill that the legislature passed in 2019, and a group of citizens disagreed with that bill. We do have the ability for direct democracy here in Colorado, and so they collected petition signatures to get that put on the ballot in order to ask the people whether or not they would agree with that position that the legislature took. Very quickly, I want to orient you to the different numbering systems. You'll see there that you've got propositions and you have letters and you have numbers. Here's what the difference is. Proposition 113 is going to change state statute, and it has a number because this is a citizen initiative. It was actually initiated by citizens who went out there, got the requisite number of signatures to place this initiative on the ballot. And if it passes, it will change state statute. If you scroll down to the bottom of that list, you see Proposition EE. Well, that is also changing state statute, but the reason why it has a letter there is because it was actually referred by the legislature. And when it comes to propositions, the legislature, we can refer different measures to the ballot. Sometimes it requires a majority vote, and that is what this one was, Proposition EE. It took a simple majority of the legislature to pass that because we're only changing statute. On the next slide, which we will see here in a minute, we have a couple of ballot measures that are actually amendments. What those are they are changes to our Colorado Constitution, and we are amending our Constitution. And again, you're going to notice that there are a couple of letters there and there are a couple of numbers there. So the numbers, again, were initiated by citizens to come in and ask the public whether to change or amend our state constitution. Those include Amendment 76, Amendment 77, and then you get to Amendment B, and Amendment B was referred to by the legislature. And you'll see up there, this is to repeal the property tax assessment rates. That was actually Amendment B was not referred to by the legislature, but it is an amendment to our Constitution, and so that's the reason why it is up there. And then there was also Amendment C, which would allow us to change our Constitution regarding bingo. You have not taken a position on Amendment C, but I would just say that it might possibly potentially help PTAs, so you might want to rethink it. The reason for that is, according to our Constitution, in order to get a bingo raffle license, you have to be in operation. A nonprofit has to be in operation for 5 years before you're eligible to apply for that bingo raffle license. And what this would do is it would repeal that 5-year minimum, and it would reduce it down to a 3-year minimum. So if you have a newer PTA that is interested in making some money for your schools through bingo, and you have to get a bingo license, this might allow you to do that sooner rather than later. So just maybe put that on your to-do list to think about. But it is not as consequential as some of the other issues that we are going to be hearing about today. And I want to point out, I think I misspoke a moment ago, Amendment B, what that is to repeal the property tax assessment rate. That is actually the Gallagher amendment that we're going to be talking about today. So the legislature referred that to the ballot. I think what I said before is that we didn't, but we did. And because it's an amendment, the legislature cannot just vote on that bill through a simple majority and get it added to the statutes. We had to pass that with a supermajority because it is an amendment to our Constitution. And then I will kind of go into some of the details about that. However, in order for these measures to pass, you have to have greater than a majority. It cannot just pass through a simple majority. These amendments to our Constitution have to pass with a super majority because we passed a change a few years ago about raising the bar. The exception to that would be Amendment B. And the reason for that is because it only has to approve with a simple majority for 2 reasons. One, because it's just a complete repeal. And if you're just going to take something out of the statutes, you do not need a supermajority. You can just have a simple majority to take something out of our Constitution in this case. And it also, when it went into effect, it was not under that raise the bar criteria. And so we can take it out with a simple majority because that's how it was put in. So there's some of the particulars about the numbering and some of the finer points of how those ballot measures were added to the ballot this fall. So we're going to start off with Proposition 116, which was citizen initiated. You know that because it's a proposition with a number. And then secondly, it's not an amendment to our Constitution because this is statutory. So what they are asking for is just to change the law, not to change our Constitution. So for example, this citizen initiative, the citizens group is asking the question whether or not we should change our Colorado revised statutes to reduce the state income tax from 4.63% to 4.55%. So right now here in Colorado, we have a flat tax rate. We do not have a progressive tax rate. Everybody, regardless of your income, is the same tax rate. And what this would do is across the board, it would reduce that tax rate for everybody. It would, in effect, reduce the amount of money that the state can collect for our general fund. Our general fund is the fund that we use to pay for things like healthcare, education, corrections, all of those types of things. Also, the general fund is the fund in which the legislature actually controls. We have a couple of different funds, including some federal funds that go into our budget, but the legislature doesn't control the federal funds. What we do control is the general fund. And if this would pass, it would reduce our income tax rate for the tax year 2020. So in the tax year that we are in right now, it would be expected to reduce our revenues for the fiscal year 2019-2020. I'm going to go very quickly to my little notes here in the Blue Book because the Blue Book actually points out some numbers on Proposition 116 that I think are very important for you all to know. So the first of which is, as I just explained, it would actually reduce the tax revenue in this tax year, 2020, and it would reduce our state revenues by 203 million. 154 million would come out of our 2021-22 tax year. So when you think about the amount of revenue that this would reduce, I'm going to be honest with you, that's going to come out of education. And the reason why it's going to come out of education is because education actually utilizes the general fund more than any other area of state government. So if we're going to reduce the general fund by $154 million in the 21-22 tax year and by $203 million in this tax year, we have already lowered the state budget this year $3.3 billion because of the impact of COVID-19. We would actually have to go back and reduce this budget again by another $203 million. Now, I will tell you, as a member of the Joint Budget Committee, we would try and spread that out among all of the services that we pay for from the general fund. But when 45% of the general fund goes towards education, we just have to be realistic that we would have to reduce our state budget and we would have to reduce our education budget even more. So I have come out in opposition to this. When we reduced the state budget $3.3 $3 billion this year, that had approximately a $600 million impact to education. And when you think about what the impact of this initiative is going to be, it's going to be quite devastating. We are just not at a point right now where we can afford to go backwards. We are hoping that our economy will start to recover so that we can begin to restore some of those cuts that we had to make this year. Right now, we are looking at approximately $1.8 billion recovery, which is tremendous if you think about where we were last April. But when you've reduced your budget by 3.3 billion and we've only increased it by 1.8 billion, that means that we're still pretty significantly short, and this would not help the situation.
And I just want to be clear that PTA has taken a position of opposition to Proposition 116. We do not support this, and we ask everyone to vote no.
And Rachel, I do have one other question based on what you're saying. If 116 were to pass, does that mean we would expect to see rescissions in education funding for this year?
Yes, we would have to, because we created our state budget for the 2021 year already. And this would impact those revenues that we expected to receive. It would actually reduce what we actually receive. So when we put together a state budget, it's not like a checkbook. What we do is we have to estimate our revenues for the coming year. So we put together a whole bunch of numbers to kind of figure out what do we think is going to happen next year, and then we budget to that. So far, we kind of overestimated how much money we thought we were going to be short on, and that's great because it's always better to overestimate than to underestimate and to come up short. However, our expenses have also come in a little bit higher than we expected. So it's this game of trying to figure out what kind of revenues are you going to get? What kind of expenses do you expect? And then you formulate a budget to meet that. And then we do this thing called supplementals, where we actually shore it up, where we actually true up the budget based on what actually happened. And this would have a significant impact on what we thought we were going to earn this year, because automatically it's going to reduce it by $210 million. So we would actually have to true up our budget, and we just don't have $210 million lying around. So we would actually have to rescind what we have already budgeted for in the coming year. As you can see on this slide, a couple of other things that's just really important for you to know. According to the Blue Book, it says that the average impact would be about $37 for, I've got like a fly buzzing around here if you're wondering why I'm like, I'm just trying to make sure it doesn't fly into my mouth here. So that would be real fun for your video. But we have approximately $40 for people that are making $50,000 a year. They would basically save $40 on their income taxes. And then a household that's making $100,000 would pay $80 less, and so on and so forth. So, but essentially, one of the points that I really want to drive home right now is that we have lots of different revenue streams that funnel into our general fund. We have state sales tax, for example, but 61%, so overwhelmingly the majority of our general fund is supported through state income taxes. So if you're going to reduce the area of our budget that makes up the majority of our general fund, it's going to have an outsized impact on those areas that we fund through the general fund. And again, education makes up the largest component of that. The second largest component of that is healthcare. And then the third largest component of that is human services. So our foster care system, funding for seniors, the funding for our disabled citizens, and so on. So those are the three areas that rely on our general fund the most, and those would be be the three areas that would be impacted the most.
Concerning.
So now we'll move on to Proposition 117. Just to be clear, this one is also one that has some really great information in your Blue Book. And I'm going to be referencing this at some point because they just really spell out very well the numbers part of this. But what this would do is this was another citizen-initiated proposition. It will change our state statutes, not our Constitution. The backers of this were primarily Americans for Prosperity, the Independence Institute, and a couple of others. What it will do is it will essentially tie our hands as legislators, as well as local governments, public colleges, and universities, to fund programs into the future without seeking a ballot measure from the state's voters. Now, currently, according to Tabor, we have revenue that is counted as revenue. And when that revenue gets to a certain level, a cap, we are not allowed to keep that revenue. Anything that is over that cap, if any revenue that is over that cap is refunded back to the voters, even though it was collected according to the existing tax rates. So one of those areas, however, are enterprise funds, and the revenues that are collected through enterprise funds do not count currently towards our Tabor refund cap. So they're not seen as tax revenue because they are cash funds, they're enterprise funds. Those funds accrue through the people that are utilizing those services because they are paying for those services directly. And they do not count toward our revenue cap because they're not considered state revenue. They're not taxes, they are fees. And so in this Blue Book on page 51, we have right now 16 government programs in Colorado that are qualifying as state enterprises. And according to this ballot measure, it would only apply to those that have revenues over 100 million, which is approximately 7. So 7 of our current state revenue enterprise programs would be affected by this ballot measure. And what those are, and this is very important to, I think, your group, are the higher education, colleges, universities, and auxiliary institutions that make up approximately $5.1 billion. So they would definitely fall into that category of being over 100 million. But what these are is tuition. These are student fees. These are care at our university hospitals, for example. All of those are user-funded services, so they're paying for this service. And if we eliminate the enterprise status, what will happen is that burden will then be shifted to the general fund. And then now all of those user-based fees will be considered more or less taxes. And it will be considered revenue that the state is collecting and then will then count against our revenue cap. And so if we go above our revenue cap, we are then going to have to refund all of that money back to the voters, back to the citizens, when they didn't necessarily pay into that. They weren't paying the tuition, they weren't paying the fee. For example, the Colorado Healthcare Affordability and Sustainability Enterprise. That is the healthcare, it's called the HAS fee. It's the Healthcare Affordability and Sustainability fee. That is $996 million, so almost $1 billion. And that would then count towards our revenue cap. The Colorado lottery would fit under this, for example, which is right around 679 million. Here's a biggie that has become increasingly important during this age of COVID. Unemployment insurance would now count towards our state revenues. That's $576 million. Parks and Wildlife, which is the example that was on our slide here, their hunting, fishing licenses, our habitat stamps, our boating and vehicle registrations at those state park entrance fees, all of those fees for services, people that are going fishing, that go out and get their fishing license, will now be considered taxable revenue by the state in our state budget, and will now count towards that Tabor cap. And everybody will bear the burden of that, not just necessarily. In addition to that, our correctional industries, we have about $64.3 million that would now fall under that. Including the sale of manufactured products and the sale of agricultural products. And then in addition, the Petroleum Storage Tank Fund would also now would count. This is a fee that tank operators actually pay for on petroleum sales, and that would now be considered revenue by the state. So this has the potential to have an enormous effect on our state budget if we repeal, if this passes and it repeals those enterprise funds. Now, there's always the possibility, the people that are in favor of us, is that they would say, well, if this is so good, well, then just take it to the voters and have the voters approve it, right? But we don't know how that happens. So.
Yeah, and we also know how long it actually takes us to explain some of these, our tax revenue structure and enterprise fees in Colorado. You can talk about it for 2 hours during a presentation, and then there's still more questions. So, and people don't retain all of that. And again, 117 is another one that Colorado PTA, we've taken a position of opposition to 117. So it's just too negative for public education and our services.
The next one, I am by no means an expert on this one. This one is Proposition 118, which is on paid family and medical leave. We had a really good presentation during my town hall on this program. What the purpose of it would be is to create a statewide paid family and medical leave insurance program that would actually be operated as a state-run program through the Department of Labor and Employment. And then the purpose of this is actually to provide a partial wage replacement benefit for up to 12 weeks per year to eligible employees, and employment protections for employees who take leave. And the premium for this insurance program would be split between employers and employees. And then there were some specific provisions within the program that would allow local governments to opt out of this program, but particularly if they already had a program in place. Have to be able to meet the minimum requirements of this program in order to opt out. And then it would not apply to businesses, small businesses with under 10 employees. And but it would apply to larger businesses unless they met those minimum criteria in order to opt out and to use their own program that they already have in place. Some of the benefits to this obviously would be for new parents. It gives them an opportunity to bond with their children. It also helps families who might be supporting a family member that have gotten sick. For example, if you had a child that had a serious illness, you would be able to take some family medical leave in order to care for them. This program has been implemented in other states, and some of the statistics that have come from that program in other states demonstrates that the majority of the people that actually utilize this benefit utilize it for their own self-care, which is interesting because most of the talk around this program is for people that maybe just had a baby, or for somebody who's caring for an aging parent. And yes, those would be instances that would be covered by the program, but it turns out that the majority of the people that are using the program in other states use it for their own self-care. I find that to be really fascinating. I would also encourage you to take a look at the Blue Book on this, because it really goes into a very good analysis of how this insurance program would be set up. It would have a little bit of an impact to the state budget, but for the most part, it would operate as, by the way, an enterprise, which is what we were just talking about on the last slide. I did ask the question of Representative Matt Gray during my town hall because I was very curious to know the answer to this. If 117, for example, passes and we now eliminate the ability for enterprises, would that impact this program because it's being set up as an enterprise? And the answer was no, that it would actually be exempt because this would pass before that would go into effect. So it would actually not be affected by that. But that still doesn't mean that you shouldn't vote no on 117. Let's just not worry about it at all altogether.
With you.
The next one is a preposition, which means that it's actually going to be changing state statute, but it has letters instead of numbers. And the reason for that is because it was referred by the legislature. So the legislature had a bill, we voted on this bill, we passed this bill, and so then this bill was then referred to the legislature and became Proposition EE, which would actually increase tobacco and nicotine product taxes. Now, a couple of things about this one, because it's a little complicated, is that the first couple of years of revenue that's going to come in under EE will actually come to the state budget, to the general fund, which is fantastic from a joint budget perspective because we could really use the revenue right now. However, the going forward after a certain couple of years, it is actually structured to help provide funding for preschool programming. And so in addition to that, some of the finer points of the bill that was negotiated down at the state legislature was to put in a couple of other elements of where this revenue would go to. 3 years of additional funding will actually go to our Colorado rural schools, for example. They have been particularly hit during this time of COVID, because when you are looking at having to transfer some of your learning to remote learning, learning from home over a computer, many of our rural school districts do not have a functional broadband system to be able to actually do quality remote learning. So they've been really challenged. But not only that, our rural schools have also been hit with the majority of the teacher shortages in our state are in our rural schools, as well as the budget stabilization factor has an outsized impact on our rural schools because they have smaller budgets. And so when you are reducing a state budget by approximately 8%, or greater, which is what the budget stabilization factor was this year, that has a really outsized impact on our rural schools. So part of the revenue that would be dedicated for by increasing this tax on cigarette, tobacco, and other nicotine products will actually go towards our rural schools. And then its first 3 years will actually go into the state education fund, which is when I said that the money will come to schools. It's and the state education fund primarily funds K-12 education. So that component, and it's only for 3 years because the majority of this is supposed to go towards helping our Colorado preschool program, but we really needed the money in the short term. So that was negotiated in the bill.
And we are supporting this one.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
We are supporting this one. So, and Senator Zenzinger, you've been a huge champion of talking about education funding too, and real funding. So, you were around too back with Amendment 64 and still being an advocate. We're to the point where we will just take any money you could possibly give us for education because we are so underfunded. And of course, that means we have the lowest paid education staff members in the nation, pretty much. Every once in a while, somebody beats us to be number 50. So, but
Mississippi.
Yeah, but we just want to make it clear that, that Amendment 64, we've been answering that question for years. Marijuana did not fix school funding. And this is also not going to fix school funding, but we're desperate for the funding.
Yeah, less than marijuana revenues, and trust me, the marijuana revenues are going towards education. They are going towards schools, but it represents less than 1% of our education budget. So no, it did not fix our issues. And this one will not either, to just be frank. We reduced, we had to increase the budget stabilization factor $600 million. So, and this, I think, stands to get us the actual amount of money that this will generate is pretty minuscule in comparison to what the education budget is. But every little bit helps. I will note that one thing that is interesting about this is that we already have cigarette tobacco taxes. We already have that. And but what we don't have are taxes on nicotine products, which is vaping. And we also have one of the highest vaping rates in the country among our teenagers. And so this actually creates a tax on e-cigarettes and on vaping products. And we are really hopeful that this will help discourage our youth from getting addicted to these products. I will also note in the Blue Book, I think that this is one of the best things about the write-up in the Blue Book is that they have this great chart that shows where the taxes are going to go. For the first year, it shows that, primarily it's going to go to K-12 education. A little small part of it is going to go towards housing. Another larger part will go to those rural schools. And then we have just a little smidgen that's going to go towards the general fund. Which we then can put in towards education. And then the next year, it kind of shows you where that money will go. And then 3 years from now, the majority of it, that big solid bar right there, shows that it will be going to our state preschool program. So just to give you an idea, some of the money will also go towards healthcare programming to help people with addiction programs. So I would just take a look at that. when you get some time in your blue book so that you can see it. We are running up on time here. We're at 10:41, and I think we were supposed to stop at like 10:50. So I'm going to try and speed this up a little bit.
Important one. So yeah.
Yes. So hopefully this is, you know, we're building to a climax here, because this one is really important. So this is Amendment B. It's an amendment because it's going to amend our state constitution. We had an amendment back in 1981, I believe, that was put into our state constitution it was referred by Senator Gallagher, which is why it's called the Gallagher Amendment. But he couldn't actually put it on our constitution because the people have to vote on amendments to our constitution, but it was referred to the ballot. And what this is that the state legislature took up a bill. We had to pass this bill with a 2/3 majority. So this was a bipartisan bill that passed. It had to pass with a 2/3 majority of both the House and the Senate to be able to refer this to the ballot to amend our Constitution. And you can see that it was actually Senate Concurrent Resolution 1. So if you wanted to look up what that was on our legislative website, that's how you would find it. And it's considered a Senate concurrent resolution and not Senate bill because it's a referendum to the statute or to the ballot. So it would repeal the requirement for the General Assembly to periodically change the residential assessment rate in order to maintain the statewide proportion of residential property as compared to all other taxable property valued for property tax purposes, and repeal the non-residential property tax rate assessment of 29%. So just off the bat, that is a lot of words, and it seems very complicated. So this is another one I would recommend that you look up in your blue book. But I just want to skip to something that I think is really important to call out. On page 11, there is a question here that says, how does Amendment B affect non-residential taxpayers? Non-residential are businesses. Okay, so if residential are our homes, non-residential are everything else. So, you know, you've heard some people say, oh, well, this is going to increase taxes. Actually, it will not. And in fact, it will have no impact on the amount of taxes that are paid by most residential, non-residential property owners. And it will prevent property tax increases for businesses, farmers, and other non-residential property owners. So this really stands to benefit actually our non-residential to really benefit our businesses who are struggling right now. So I think that they could really use that benefit. Also, and then in the blue book on page 11, there's a question that says, how does Amendment B impact state government spending for schools? Which is really why we are talking about this today. So just by way of background, the Gallagher Amendment requires that a residential to non-residential property tax ratio. So non-residential, 45% to 55% of your residential, and that's all based on your assessment rate, your tax assessment of these properties. And the majority of the local share of funding for schools comes from property taxes. So anytime you have a change in the tax assessment, and what has been happening over the years is that our tax assessment has ratcheted down significantly from 21% to currently what it is at 7.15%. And this is set in statute, this is actually in our Constitution under the Gallagher Amendment when we amended our Constitution back in 1981. So over time, the amount of taxes that are collected are based on that assessment rate. How are we going to assess what your property's value is? And that has ratcheted down to the low rate of 7.15%. Next year, we stand to look at another ratcheting down of that assessment rate. And if that goes down, then what will be available per our revenues that we then use for education will decrease, and it will decrease by approximately $500 million. So just to be frank, we are looking at a potential $500 million decrease to state revenue that we use for funding our schools. So what this amendment does is it would not increase taxes. It wouldn't decrease taxes. It would just freeze everybody where you are right now, where we are right now at the 7.15% for residential property, and we would freeze it at 29% for non-residential property right now. And I think that that's great. If we wanted to reduce our taxes, then we would have to go and ask the people, hey, can we reduce your taxes? And if the people decide, yes, I want you to reduce my taxes, and that's exactly what we will do, because we can't not do that, because that's what we have here in Colorado is the people get to decide. So it's not going to change that component of our tax code, of our Constitution. That will still be in effect. So people will still have a say if they want to reduce their taxes. But the legislature will not automatically reduce the assessment rate as we have been doing for years and years and years as a result of this constitutional amendment in our Constitution. So it's much more complicated than that, than what I have conveyed to you today. I just wanted to get down to the nitty-gritty, which is this question in our Blue Book: how does Amendment B impact state government spending for schools? So schools are funded through a combination of state and local revenues. We've got our local share, we've got our state share, with the state making up the difference, which is the amount of school district funding identified through a formula that is in our state law, and the amount of local tax revenue that is generated. So if our local school districts come up short, guess what? The state has to backfill them. If they do not meet their constitutional obligations for funding their schools, then the state has to come in and we have to backfill that amount. And that is how the budget stabilization factor came into existence. Is right now we are coming in and we are backfilling local revenue shortages that are occurring all throughout our state because of Gallagher. And so if by preventing future decreases in the residential assessment rate, Amendment B will increase local property tax collections for school districts and reduces the amount the state must pay to make up the difference. And it doesn't increase taxes, it just keeps us where we are, and it prevents the state from having to come in and backfill the future decreases that will result if the residential property assessment goes down, as we know it will next year, $500 million. So please, 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 please vote for this amendment.
And we do support this. We strongly support this amendment at PTA. So it is crucial that everyone share this information and get that out. And Senator Zenzinger, I mean, seriously, a lot of things have changed since the 1980s and 1990s. So, and one of them is not our school finance structure. So, which is a shame. So, can you imagine if we all looked like we did in the 1980s?
I know.
Yeah, really time to update that. This has been coming for a very long time. John, I think you probably have something to add to this as well.
I just wanted to underscore, especially with Rachel here, is that the perfect storm for the worst case scenario would be if 116 passes and Amendment B does not, because then not only does the state share drop, but we'd have less funds from the local share drops, and then we have less funds in the state share to backfill. So, I mean, I think it could be catastrophic for our schools, especially.
So, and may I also point out that in this last recession, because of COVID, you know, we had to reduce the state budget $3.3 billion. When you look at who are the big five, what are the departments that utilize the general fund? Primarily, it is K-12 education, higher education, Medicaid, which is healthcare, human services, and corrections. So in addition to decreasing our K-12 funding, we had a very, very huge reduction in higher education. So if we pass a state income tax reduction, we're looking at a $200 million hit to the budget this year. If we pass the ability for our higher education institutions to have those enterprise funds for their auxiliary services and their tuition, then it's going to have like a super big impact on our higher education. And then on top of that, if this repeal of the Gallagher Amendment does not go through, we're looking at a $500 million revenue impact reduction to our state budget next year. And you're going to have just literally a $1 billion problem on our hands. Right now, we are way below the Tabor cap because we had to reduce our state budget so much. So, you know, we're about $3.3 billion or thereabouts from hitting that Tabor cap. But if we eliminate those enterprise funds, higher education was $5 billion. So we would be over our Tabor cap. So in the worst budget year that we can imagine next year, which it will be worse than this year, we will have to refund people money out of our general fund, while also reducing our funding for education, while reducing our funding for healthcare and higher education. Higher education really took the brunt of our reductions this year, because even though we had to increase the budget stabilization factor by $600 million, the federal government actually came in and gave school districts about $505 million. So $505 million. So that really helped to offset some of the reductions that we made to our state budget. It still increased, you know, the budget stabilization factor because that money was not allowed to flow through the state budget. It just went directly to the districts. But our higher education institutions, the general fund only represents about 30% of their funding, and we eliminated 49% of their funding.
Yep.
So,
and you and I both have children who are getting ready to finish their high school career and go to college. So you and I
they
both
will have to make that up through increases to tuition, and already higher education is too expensive for the majority of Coloradans. So it would be another devastating impact to education.
Yes, and considering Colorado is one of the highest educated states in our nation, boy, we really, really hope that people will be paying attention. So this particular amendment be crucial, crucial, crucial that everyone make sure that they vote yes. And we've got a little overtime. We are so grateful to you for sharing a couple hours of your Saturday here with us and helping put together the presentation. And John,
Thank you, Rachel.
so thank you so very much, Senator Zenzinger. Thank you. You are wonderful. If anybody has any other questions, please feel free to email advocacy@jeffcopta.org, and we will get those answers to you if we don't have them. We have wonderful legislators in Jeffco like Senator Zenzinger, and we will get you the answers if we don't have them. So thank you, and everybody have a fabulous Saturday. And please go get some new shoes, Senator Zenzinger. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.